Basim Al-Baker is a senior UX researcher at Dance, a premium e-bike subscription based in Berlin. Following a brief role in sales rep in Japan, Basim sought purpose in his work, leading him to retain in UX. He's worked for user researcher, consultant, educator for companies like SoundCloud, Blinkist, and Hyper Island before joining the team at Dance full-time. In his spare time, he enjoys jogging, gaming, and browsing Simpsons memes, which I can attest to because I think I saw some on his screen earlier when he was sharing his screen beforehand. But other than that, I will turn it over to Basim. I'm gonna remove my phone.
Thank you very much for the intro, Hannah, and welcome everyone. Really, really nice to see a crowded Zoom room. And I'm just going to put it out there right now that I'm a little bit nervous. So if my voice cracks or if you see me sweating profusely through my clothing, that's why. But let's kick this off, shall we? I'm just going to do a quick check with everyone to make sure you can see my screen and my slides. How are we looking? Yeah. Yeah, we're looking good. Okay.
Yeah, we can
Great. Okay, awesome. So welcome to Building Research Rapport, not Building Research Reports. A little bit of background. I love puns as well as Simpsons memes. So that's kind of why I landed on this title. Came up with the title first, did the content later. So that's my style. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat as we go through. And I'm also going to be like kind of prompting people to write in there. So yeah, I don't want to just be talking at you for the next 30 or so minutes. Get those fingers ready for some typing, please. Okay, so let's get started. I wanted to talk you through a couple of talking points. So today we're going to go through a couple of things. I'm going to walk through a bit of an introduction. Since Hannah very kindly introduced me to all of you, I have skipped those slides for today. And we're going to be talking about a model for building research report. And then I'm going to kind of talk about what this research rapport means in practice. If you've never heard of the word research rapport, or if you've never heard of the word rapport, then I will go through all of that. If you've never heard of the word introduction, then I'm sorry, I'm not able to really define that today. I hope you have heard of the word introduction. And then we have 15 minutes for Q&A. So I will take like questions at the end primarily because I don't want to disrupt the flow too much. But if you do have a thought and you do have a question, like type it in the Zoom chat, and then I will actually like look at the Zoom questions as we get into Q&A. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So shall we kick things off with the introduction? So I'm assuming that a lot of you are here because you are interested in user research and you know what it kind of means, but I do want to quickly provide a definition to like just, yeah, be on the same page as you. So I think quite a lot of people really associate user research with understanding people, but in my experience, it goes beyond that, and it's understanding people and how they interact with products and services around them, whether they're digital or physical. And as user researchers, we want to do this so that we work within a company's products and work for services where the solutions actually meet the user needs. So that's kind of my introduction to the definition of user research. But when it comes to rapport, let's actually like talk a little bit about what that means. So I looked up a definition in ye old Cambridge Dictionary, and rapport, according to them, means a good understanding of someone and an ability to communicate well with them. Does anyone have like an understanding of rapport outside of this, or maybe even somewhat similar to this? Feel free to sound off in the chat. What does rapport mean to all of you? Or does it mean anything to you? Okay. Vibing. Nice. Yeah. Ooh, we got quite a lot of nice comments here. So comfort with communicating openly. Absolutely think that is a really key part of it. Goes beyond communication, like a connection. Yeah, absolutely. Being able to make someone comfortable to speak honestly. I wasn't sure. That's okay. Don't worry about that. A relationship. Yes, absolutely. A rapport is a trustful situation. Mutual trust and agreement, being comfortable to speak openly to someone. Yeah, these are all like great definitions. I also had this one, which is from the Oxford Dictionary, which is like, according to them, a close and harmonious relationship in which the people or groups concerned understand each other's feelings or ideas and communicate well. So what does like research rapport mean? I mean, I guess I did kind of like introduce this term to the world. I guess for me, it's kind of a trusting and harmonious relationship between researchers and could be participants, of course, because if you are in a user interview or if you're doing a user test, you want to have that like relationship with someone. You want to create that sense of safety and belonging within that space. But today I really want to talk about what it means to have this trusting and harmonious relationship between researchers and stakeholders. Stakeholders being anyone who has a stake in your project, who's actively involved in your like research findings, whether they're like a decision maker or whether they're an ally. The reason for this is pretty much because UX research is a permanent collaborator with stakeholders. We're always working with stakeholders, whether they're designers, whether they're product managers, engineers, they work in marketing, or whether they're leadership of your company. So I think that serves as the introduction. I wanted to kind of get a couple of things set as a baseline of understanding, and I want to then talk about a model for building this research report. So let's talk about building, or buildings in this case. I obviously took this very, very literally. And there's probably no way you were expecting me to come up with a picture of a building for this, but does anyone know what this is? Does anyone want to hazard a guess? Maybe some of the Scandinavians amongst us? Yes, Opera House in Oslo. Very nice. Yeah, so this is the Oslo Opera House. I think this picture was taken around 2008, judging by how blurry it is. And I essentially am bringing this up because I found a really interesting article when I was researching this topic myself. And it's an academic article. It's called Building Trust in Project Stakeholder Relationships. And it went through this, like all of the project and stakeholder relationships that were within the construction of the Oslo Opera House. And I thought this was like super fascinating because it kind of had so many correlations between like not just my career, but also just certain events as I've grown as a researcher. And I really liked this model because I like kind of took a look at it and I thought there is quite a few things that we can adapt here, including a model for actually building this. But some of the like main takeaways from the article itself were that trust is super important for building a well-functioning business relationship, and trust in this context goes both ways. So it's not just one party that needs to build that trust, but it needs to be kind of like a mutual thing that's shared. And unfortunately, just as you can easily lose trust, but you have to work to build it. So it has to be earned. I think it's funny, like this whole concept of trust really comes down to a lot of different relationships, but I wanted to essentially map this out as they have mapped it out in their article, so that you can see some of the different like components of that here. So according to this article, the model for trust building in a project and stakeholder relationship, it has all of these different components that go into it. I don't want to talk about everything here. I would really like to focus on just a couple of components that I think are useful to give a little bit of detail on within the world of user research. And I also believe that like some of the things that I kind of, put into the background here, like reliable behavior, integrity, commitment, sincerity, benevolence, to me, those also feel a little bit more like personality traits or like values that maybe you need to like really like focus and work on. Whereas things like good communication, reaching project milestones, goal congruence, and competence, I think those are things that we can easily talk about in the next 20, 30 minutes. And I will illustrate some of those with examples. Let me just do one thing. I scratched out model for trust building in a project stakeholder relations, scratched out project, and now we've got researcher stakeholder, and now we've got a model for building research rapport. And wait, let's spice it up a bit, shall we? There we go. Yeah, there we go. I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm just checking the comments here, and I'd love to see a similar report for the Berlin-Brandenburg airport. I would love to see that as well. Like, I would really love to know how they managed to lose trust over the very long and intense and all the failures of that airport. I'm sure there's like a design document out there somewhere that is very detailed. But yeah, so I kept this on the screen for a little bit longer because this is what I'm going to try and focus on today. And I will illustrate this with some examples and talking points. So now that we have our model in place, let's actually talk a little bit about what that looks like in practice. So first, we talked about reaching project milestones. So just like we defined some of the other things like rapport and research rapport, let's also spend a little bit of time defining what a project milestone is. So this definition I found, I think, covers it quite accurately. It's a marker in a project that signifies a change or a stage in development. Pretty clear. And for me, I really like to try and track these project milestones in some form of a research plan. When we're talking about research plans, they can take so many different forms. Personally, I would say, you have all of these different tools and templates and checklists. Personally, I would say just try to find the research plan format that is based on your team's needs, the project that you're working on, any sort of like context that's actually driving like any research that you're doing, as well as like the organization that you work for. I didn't want to come and like suggest the winning research plan format because it just really depends on so many different parameters. And, we're all from different like parts of the world. We all work at different organizations. We all do different things. It wasn't useful for me to really stick with a particular plan format to give to you, but I did want to actually share an example of what the research planning phase looked like for a project that I did at Blinkist. So if you're not familiar with Blinkist, Blinkist is an app that essentially does nonfiction book summaries as well as other audio content. So it's all about kind of like learning and development. And we cover like a wide range of different categories, but for this particular project, we had some new and important content launches that were coming up. So we were going to introduce full-length audiobooks, which was a huge change from what we were originally like hosting on the platform, which were, you know, written book summaries and book summaries that you could listen to in about 15 or 20 minutes. A full-length audiobook often, like, you know, lasts hours. So we had that, and then we also had like some original shows and author exclusive content that was also coming in. So in order to really understand the context in which people were like listening and using these things, we figured that we didn't want to just do a user test or an interview where we would speak to them for like an hour and then go our separate ways. For us, it was really important to understand how they were using it in their context, hence this diary study format. If you're not familiar with the term diary study as a research format, I would look it up. But the main thing that you need to know is that we followed them for a much longer period than you could typically for an interview or a user test. So we were planning to follow them for about 2 weeks, check in with them every so often, and really get an understanding of their listening habits, their situations, and you know, how they were actually consuming this content with that rich contextual flavor as well. So some of the milestones that we kind of defined here, this isn't everything. This is just one visualization of how the actual like diary study looked, because there were several different phases, starting with kickoff interviews, as you can see there. We actually had this diary portion for 10 days where we would give them tasks and prompts like every 2 days, and check in with them and see like how they're listening to stuff. And then finally, we would wrap up the interviews and pay them incentives by the end of that. We did have more like robust milestones in other different formats, and that was mainly for the stakeholders, but we built this for our participants as well. I'm going to take this question because I think it's important. How is a remote diary study working concretely? How did you check in? We used Slack. We basically created these individual Slack channels, so like one Slack channel per participant, and we invited a researcher and a product manager and a designer to actually essentially serve them the tasks and then follow up with them on any posts that they made, pictures that they took, videos that they shared with us. And yeah, we essentially had like a bank of questions that we wanted to ask them, and we would like say good morning or good afternoon, depending on the time zone they were in, and set that expectation for when we were going to approach them with our questions. We did this with 10 participants, I think, and the process of getting the diary study approved. Good question. So the process of getting the diary study approved was essentially me taking the like unanswered research questions that we had as an organization, and I took those and then kind of pitched for the diary study to take place, given that we still had like a decent amount of time to respond to any changes that we might want to, or iterations that we wanted to do after the study. And I was a research lead at Blinkist, so I basically had to build rapport with my stakeholders. Hey, there's the title again. Yeah, I don't think the approval process was all that challenging, but we can talk more about it in the Q&A section. Very quickly going to answer Simon's question just to move on after this. How do you get people to actually go through the whole diary study? My experience is that it might be hard to keep the participants active for more than a few days. We paid incentives to them. Of course, we had the budget to do that, which really helps, but we paid out incentives based on their participation. So if they weren't, we essentially had a quick call with them at the very beginning of the study, and we told them what like incentive structure looked like for us, and we would essentially pay out based on how much they participated. So they all were also incentivized to participate up to like our standards. Honestly, was about 30 minutes per day. It wasn't like a huge ask, but we would also give them a chance to catch up. And we checked in, I think, 3 times during the study to let them know how they were doing overall. Yeah, so that is how we kept them active. Anyway, this, I don't know if I said, but I should mention that this was done in 2020. So does anyone know what happened during this week in March 2020? All the COVID, yeah, all the COVID. Yeah, we went into lockdown during our diary study, and part of the research kind of goal was to understand how people listen to different types of content in different contexts. Suddenly, everyone had the same context, and people weren't taking public transport. They weren't going to the office. We were kind of shocked, and we didn't really know what to do. So rather than scrap the entire project and just throw away our hard work after planning all that stuff, we leaned into the fact that the plan changed. So we actually reworked the diary study to leverage this change. We addressed the elephant in the room. So rather than us talking about these, asking them questions and getting them to answer prompts, asking them, where did you listen to this piece of content today? In the toilet, in the bathroom, that wasn't really useful. So we actually change the prompts and the questions to ask them about how is COVID-19 impacting your home life? How is it impacting your well-being? How is it impacting your habits? And as I mentioned before, these diary studies are really, really good ways about gathering this contextual insight. So yeah, it was a really great chance for us to actually still get learnings based on a more urgent opportunity. This actually directly impacted one of the content streams that we created. So we created a whole content stream called Checking In that was based on well-being topics. And it was really, really geared towards getting people to basically checking in and making sure that people understood there was a place on Blinkist for them to basically listen to topics about well-being, health, isolation, loneliness, that kind of thing. So yeah. Hey, I know there's a global pandemic, but could you still do my diary study? Yeah, I mean, I think they were pretty bored. So yeah, it wasn't a hard sell. So yeah, that was one thing about research plans that I wanted to share with you. Good communication. So we talked about this, about also being an element of a successful project, research stakeholder relationship. So I just like this definition, because communicating effectively means that your ideas and concepts are being heard and people are acting upon them. I think this was really relevant within a research context. And what it made me think about immediately was the time that I contributed this blog post to my friends at Nidos Academy. And I shared a story on their blog about my first major mistake. And I say mistake, but it was much more strongly worded in the blog post itself. And I want to share that with you today. So as an example of maybe not so good communication. So in my early days as a research intern at SoundCloud, I was tasked with writing my first research report. So this was after a bunch of sessions, which were really quite intense and were several hours of work. It wasn't just a 1 hour interview. Each session was around 2 or 3 hours. And it was a big ask, to go from no reports to one report. I really set such a high bar on myself. And I thought okay, you got to write the perfect report. So My perfect report was born after 1 month of work. And I organized a 60-minute meeting with the project stakeholders after this month of toiling away on this perfect report. And as I opened up the slide deck, one of my colleagues said, "We don't have time to go through this whole thing. Can you just share the highlights with us?" And you know, they weren't wrong, because yeah, I'm gonna kind of give you a preview of how long that report was. Yeah, not done. Still not done. Still not done. Also still not done. Okay, now I'm done. It was 32 slides. Yeah, it was 32 slides of text. It was, there was no kind of like executive summary or overview of insights or takeaways. There was no like actual empathy for my stakeholders, because I shared these findings weeks after their deadline, weeks. And yeah, there were a lot of anecdotes and details from users that just were completely irrelevant for the project. So that was my perfect research report. If I were to do it differently now, it would look something like this. With my, yeah, sorry, I'm just basking in the glow of Simpsons. I just have to do that for a second. Okay, I would keep it super simple in my reports moving forward, like really heavy on the visuals, video snippets, also minimal text. And yeah, like my reports today look very, very different. And you know, of course, you can also use Notion, Miro, Confluence, whatever it is that like actually makes sense within your company or organization. But I just wanted to kind of show you the before and after specific to like slide reports. So yeah, just checking in on the chat here. No one wants to read, they want highlights and visuals. Absolutely. I recently also made a like I do this kind of like thing at my company meetings and presentations where I'm like, I introduced a recent research project. I tell them a little bit about it, and then I'm like, but that's enough from me. Let's hear from the users. And then I play a video snippet highlight reel, and that also like creates so much like buzz and conversation. So speaking of like communicating research findings beyond like just the report, and you know, at these, I've done things where I've, you know, of course, presented in front of my company. That picture on the top left is a time before COVID, when I think I was also 5 years younger. I would present the research findings in a short demo for like 5-10 minutes, but I would also invite people to join for an open house, you know, later that week, or, you know, in 1 week's time, where they would get a more detailed walkthrough of the report and the findings, and it would be more interactive, more Q&A. I've also sent out user research newsletters, and I've even made like YouTube videos at Blinkist as well, on how to do user research, and also just things that essentially lived on beyond like the life cycle of a project, but also catered to people's preferences for soaking up this information. So in my mind, oh yeah, Jeff, you were there. So in my mind, you've got to set these mutual expectations for research deliverables. Of course, as an intern, I didn't know this, but now that's like the minimum step that I take. But really, like, make time to go beyond what's expected. Do those like open houses, speak at demos. at Dance, I speak every 2 weeks at our company-wide meeting. And, sometimes I'm like, oh, what am I going to talk about this week? But there's always something. There's absolutely always something user research related. So yeah, I want to now kind of take this idea of setting mutual expectations and talk a little bit about goal congruence. So this is a very dry term. And, for a dry term, you've got to take it from a very dry piece of literature. So this term is from Management Accounting, Information for Decision-Making and Strategy Execution. I do hope none of the authors of this piece of literature are in the room right now. But goal congruence to them means the consistency or agreement of individual goals with company goals. In a research kind of world, I think this really relates to the alignment of user needs. Typically user needs and business goals get kind of compared quite a lot. But you could also look at feasibility, time, resources, KPIs. I mean, it sounds like quite a lot of stuff, and it certainly sounds complicated, and I'm not going to lie, it is complicated, but there are ways to kind of actually move this process forward and just try to start from somewhere. So what I use quite a lot is this UX prioritization matrix. Maybe you're familiar with it. It is a very nice thing to run as a workshop. And the way that I've done it in the past is just by essentially defining all of the individual items, criteria, and scales for said workshop. Typically, these will take place when you're working on something that's really key to the business, but something that's unknown, something that might be a completely new feature, a new direction. I wouldn't use this for a really small usability test or iteration on what you've already got, but maybe you want to discover what's next. So what you can put on these Post-it notes are ideas. Ideas can come from anywhere and anyone. So I would also invite people to think of projects that are either ongoing or projects that are planned. Feature requests come out quite a lot, or even just particular themes that you want to explore here. So what you would do next is in this workshop, you would essentially invite everyone who's taking place to brainstorm and add their Post-its. So I've run this exact workshop with myself as a researcher, with design, product, but also other stakeholders and decision makers. If, let's say, marketing actually has a stake in this project, they would be invited, of course. Basically anyone who you think will help you gain traction for this. So we would essentially write all of our stuff down and then dot vote with a color scheme. So everyone would get a certain number of votes, which are usually scaled to the number of ideas that are on the board, and they would be color coded. So you could actually start to rank and prioritize these. So in this particular diagram, you've got urgency marked as green and importance marked as orange. And once you've done that, you would arrange the Post-it notes on your matrix according to the votes. Just also a heads up, I'm happy to make all of these slides public because I've referenced and linked so many things that are going to be really helpful for you to get some of these things off the ground. So yeah, just a heads up that I will be sending those, or we'll get those to you somehow after this talk. And after you've voted on all of these different items, you actually place them on these different quadrants, and then you want to pursue items that are let's say, high importance and high urgency. I'm not sure why urgency didn't render here, but this axis should be urgency. Or maybe if you're working with different kind of frameworks or different axes, you want to do something that's a high user value and also high feasibility, something that you can actually get off the ground and work on. And I added another example, which is high delight, but low time to implement. I would say these are all things that you can kind of consider and decide what to do with. But some of the things that we work on at Dance, I can't actually show you like exact examples from what we're working on because they're kind of sensitive, but we tend to look at user value and time to ship as well as user value and business need. And I just also wanted to share that like one of the engineers came up with this lovely little boat range scheme, so that like a little canoe is the least time to ship, and a giant cruise ship for the cruise ship singer amongst us is the longest time to ship. So you would want to do things which are high user value and lower time to ship as well. So after you've done all of these things as a researcher, I'm just keeping an eye on time, and I'm going to try and get through the next slides quite quickly. By this time as a researcher, you know, you've reached your project milestones, you've been communicating effectively, you've aligned on business goals, user needs. You would have hopefully achieved a high level of competence by the end of this. And what better way to illustrate this than with an example from our favorite show, The Simpsons. So did Homer Simpson deserve a plaque for heroic competence for avoiding a nuclear meltdown? I suppose so. I suppose he did save quite a few lives by doing so, but I would argue that when you see how he did it, I wouldn't exactly call that competent. So I personally believe in order to talk about competence and think about competence, we need to start from a place of awareness rather than just, you know, covering your eyes and blindly poking around. So I think that it doesn't really matter, like, to me, like what you view as, like, you know, let me rephrase that. Obviously, I'm improvising here, so it's not going to be perfectly worded. I personally think you can't be competent at everything, and you are probably more competent at things than you realize. Okay, I'm glad that I rephrased that. That sounded kind of good. So check in on your skills. And one of my favorite ways to do that is with this research skills framework. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the research ops community. And yeah, like I have been referencing a lot of like stuff that maybe, you know, is already out in the world and wasn't created by me, but I'm not going to reinvent the wheel when they've done it so well. This is essentially a framework and tool for like building awareness for your research skill set. And yeah, it's a fantastic site that has tools, skills, documentation, all about assessing and growing research skills specifically. And I did this actually before this talk. So it's essentially just like a spreadsheet that you can do a self-rating on for all of these different aspects. Like, I know the text is a little small, but there's a bunch of different themes and a bunch of different like things that you can actually self-assess yourself on. Self-assess yourself on. Come on, Basim, you can do better than that. And yeah, once you actually go through this exercise, you come up with a bunch of like scores and averages for these different themes that you have there. So everything from coordination, data management, a couple of things which you might actually want to look up definitions for, like integration, service delivery. But it does give you an idea of where your strengths and weaknesses lie. And I think another really effective way of doing this is actually get someone to assess you as well. Because as I said, I'm my own harshest critic. I've like, maybe you've seen that over the course of this talk when I've told myself you can do better. So it really helps to actually have someone who knows you and someone who can assess you do that activity for you as well. So you can see, like, you know, apply the law of averages. Maybe you are better at something than you think. But getting a second perspective is really, really helpful. And I've used this tool every 6 months to check in and see what's like stagnant and see what's actually, you know, improving with time, as you might hope. So yeah, like, you know, you can go from avoiding a nuclear meltdown to building your own nuclear reactor, just like that. So yeah, as I said, like I am going to share these slides with you. I would normally do a recap here, but that would be useless. Just check out the slides after this talk. I want to invite everyone to ask questions at this point. So thank you very much for your attention. And yeah, any questions from the group?
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Basim. It was really wonderful. Loved seeing the examples that you've done in previous companies and what it looked like for you in real life as well. And we definitely have some questions that have come in already on Slido. If you guys have more questions,
Nice.
we can submit those. Maybe Jeff can put the link back in the chat again, but I'll just go off of some of the ones that we already have at the moment. Yeah. So we have one.
Do you want
from
to share your screen actually?
Sure. Well, I mean, I'll just read them
why
off, but if you wanna stop sharing, we can just go into like grid view too as well.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So we have a question from Nari, and she's asking when kind of specifically about these reels that you were talking about and the outputs that you're kind of communicating the results and the insights from the research, and a little bit of specific of like what do you use to actually make them, but also like are you focusing on positive highlights only? Like how do you choose what actually goes into the content of that like responses and stuff?
Maybe I'll start from like a reverse order to those questions. And I have the memory of a goldfish. So if I don't touch on something, please like call me out and I'll be happy to answer that. Cool. So focus on positive highlights. I think there is an inherent danger in doing one or the other. One of the recent like show reels that I actually shared within my like current company was almost all negative. And that I thought like, I was like, okay, but we want to present the accurate view and we want to make sure that users' voices are heard. That wasn't the right call. I would have done it differently. So I think like everything, think about moderation, like try to include like things which are actually truly, you know, I'm not going to use the word positive or negative, but things which are accurate, but try not to focus too much on stuff which is also demotivating. I think beyond that, when we're talking about like actual tools that I use to do like to broadcast research findings, I use Notion a lot. Maybe you're familiar with Notion. I think Notion is quite good at being flexible, and they've introduced like things like these units that actually sync across different pages. Check them out. I think they're called synced blocks, like SYNCED blocks. And I use stuff like that to come up with like, I write all my key takeaways in there and key findings in there. And then people actually use those in their like RFCs and when they're like building, let's say feature briefs, for example, they will link directly to the key findings of my research report. And those are always up to date because they sync across different pages. I really like Notion. I'm a big nerd for them. I also use Google Slides and Miro as well, but less for the findings, and Miro is more for like the alignment stuff, the workshops. I like Notion to keep findings and reports because you can link to stuff and you can build almost like a little bit of a database. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. We have Josh said I like those alternatives to reports also to engage people in research findings, which kind of actually got to one of the questions. I think you kind of addressed it in that as well, which is like any thoughts on research outputs. Like nobody wants to read reports anymore. So yeah. I think it sounds like what you were talking about with the either databases or this Notion snippets, or putting your like highlights in a place that are findable to people who actually will need to use them in the future as well, versus buried in a report that nobody uses.
Yeah, absolutely. And honest, like I know it's annoying, but like invest time in video editing, like make some snippets, like just absolutely do it. It's so powerful when you can get like a 30-second clip of someone like talking about an issue or talking about like something that they've experienced. That's what gets people excited, I think. Yeah. Then waiting for the first UX research TikToks. I'm sure they're out there somewhere. I saw Zahra also asked like, how long does it take to write a report? I'm just going to quickly mention.
Yeah, go for it.
I set myself usually around a week to write a report, but my stakeholders are aware of the key findings before that. So I always bring them into like post-research debrief sessions. They are like the key people that needs to make decisions tomorrow or today even. They will know the findings and they will also be included in the research process too. That's something I like to bring them in as observers, as note takers. So yeah, the report's really just for like documentation and for like making a more shareable format.
Yeah, I have a couple like maybe rapid fire responses we can do too. Like such as like, when do you hold the UX work or the workshop? When you were talking about like the prioritization, like in what kind of time frame are you, or when are you holding that?
After a research project, typically. Like I would, if there are some like, if we're like, let's say we are trying to understand what delight means in the eyes of our customers, or what premium, we're a premium e-bike subscription company. We want to understand what premium means for people. I would usually hold that workshop after some research findings have actually like been, you know, drawn out from that, so that we can discuss that as a baseline. And then you know, it's kind of like an opportunity for people to like give in their own ideas while it's still weighted by user research, because we don't want just ideas from our colleagues or from ourselves. Yeah.
Well, I am going to look at time and leave it there. But is there, if people wanted to get in touch with you, or is there anything else you wanted to kind of promote or talk about from yourselves before we close it out?
So yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. Feel free to add me. You can reach out to me with a message or a Simpsons meme or a question. And I'm happy to like, yeah, stay in touch with you beyond this talk. I had a website, but I don't really like use it anymore. So I'm not gonna, why did I even talk about it? I talked about it because the domain was great. Basim.org. That was an amazing domain. But yeah, I don't think it works.
Hopefully
anymore.
You didn't give it up yet.
No, I will perpetually resubscribe to that domain. But yeah, like also thank you so much for like attending, and for like you know, Jeff and Hannah for moderating the talk, and for everything that you do. That's super awesome. Yeah, thank you.